We're starting a new series. I talked about this. What am I called to? What am I called to? And many of us, how many of you grew up in church and heard that word before, calling? Like calling card, calling. You remember a calling card? You used to have a card, especially if you were outside of the country. You'd use this card, put in the numbers, and, I can't even explain that to my children. They'll never understand. But we used to have these calling cards and prepaid, on them. I was thinking about that the other day, payphones. Right? I mean, payphones that used to be on every corner. I'm not sure if they were out here, but where I grew up in New York City, there was a payphone on every corner, and you used to have to stop and use, the dirty payphone. Make sure you had coins in your pocket. And I was thinking about that the other day. I don't remember the last time I seen one. I've seen a payphone. And so we're constantly learning and growing and improving as a society and picking up things. But one thing that always remains the same that we come back to is this word called calling. And so I want to use the book of Jonah. How many of you have ever heard the story of Jonah, this wild story? Jonah gets swallowed by a large fish, okay? But there are a lot of things that happen before Jonah gets swallowed by this large fish that is like weird to fathom and understand and to explain. Well, we're going to get there, but we're going to talk about chapter 1 today, so we're going to move kind of quickly. There's going to be a little bit of reading that you've got to do, but I do believe that somebody's going to get a word today, and you're going to leave encouraged. And so let's learn about the mission. Let's discover the mission for our life. And so let's turn to Jonah 1, verse 1. I promise you to still get you out in time for lunch. It's going to be good. It's going to be a good Sunday. It says this. It says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. It said, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But verse 3 says, but Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed to Tarshish. Give me some grace on that word, y'all. So it's a hard one. Tarshish. Okay. And he went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and he sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. You ever had somebody just sleep through it all, just can snore and just get through it? Jonah is sleeping. He's in a deep sleep. And the captain says this. He says, how can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish. Then the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity. They cast lots, and lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? He answered, he says, I am a Hebrew, and I worshiped the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. This terrified them, and they asked, what have you done? They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? He says, pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault, that this great storm has come upon you. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased. Then they took Jonah and they threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Stop right there. That was a lot of reading. Thank you so much for reading with me. And there's a lot to just unpack, right? And we started talking about calling. But let me define calling for you. Calling is a strong conviction to pursue a vocation or career path. And when we begin to add a spiritual context, what we are doing is we're inviting the Lord to speak into our purpose and our plan. And I remember the first time that I felt called to something. I was at a summer camp, and I was there playing music. And they asked me, hey, would you step in and lead worship for us this morning? We're missing some people. They're sick. They're not doing well. Would you do that? And I was just looking around, and I'm like, who, me? Like, I don't actually sing. Like, I just kind of strum. My sister sings. Well, she's not there. Family's not there. They're like, yeah, Jonathan, you're not our first choice either. But we need somebody to do this. So would you jump in and would you begin to lead worship? And so I knew a couple of songs and I started singing it. And I remember in that moment just singing and leading worship, and probably wasn't done well, but I began to see the Holy Spirit speaking to me in my life. I began to deposit some things into my life. All of a sudden, I started to feel this unity, started to feel like, wait a minute, this feels like purpose for me. And throughout my life, things began to change in the way that I saw things and decisions that I made. And I remember a leader saying to me so clearly, because we could get very caught up when we talk about calling to like the definition says, and look at vocation as our calling. And I started to look at things that way, and I started to change my lane and begin to move in that direction. And I remember a leader saying to me, he said, son, calling isn't ministry. What calling is actually intimacy. See, what we're called to is intimacy. And I just lost every man in the room. I get it. Intimacy is not something we want to talk about, man. Men, we're not very good at that. But intimacy is a relationship with the Lord that represents a closeness, that represents a covenant, that represents a connection, that represents a covering, that represents unity in our Father. See, what we're saying is his ways become our ways. We begin to adopt humility. We begin to look at things from a clearer lens, from a different filter. And many of you know this, if you've ever been married or you've been in a relationship, if you lack communication, if you lack closeness, if you lack proximity, then your relationship is probably not as healthy as it should be. And we find ways to deter. We find ways to find turnarounds and things like that, because God didn't design us to be that way. And what happens is we begin to fall into these titles in our life, and we live into these titles in our life. And then they begin to find ourselves in a place that we never thought we would be. What's the point of saying that I'm a husband and father if I'm never around? That's just a title I carry. If I'm never around, then it doesn't mean anything. And so being called to intimacy now is about having a relationship that will last. And so this morning I want to talk to you from that subject. You are called to intimacy. Write that down. Called to intimacy. And many of you who have been saved for a long time, you probably remember your relationship with Jesus when you first met him. When you first gave your life to him, how sweet that was, how amazing that was to talk about Jesus and be excited. And there was nothing you couldn't do for the Lord for the first few weeks, right? You're just on this, you probably read the Bible from front to back. There was just this excitement that we had upon us. And then over the years, we know what happens. We start getting comfortable. Things start coming in our life. And we get so comfortable that we are able to tell God no. All of a sudden, we can tell God of a higher power, of a superior, no, I'm not doing that. And we see this in the life of Jonah. that Jonah all of a sudden thinks that he can tell God what to do. And for us, when we read this passage, it's easy for us to see how Jonah, not easy, but at least difficult for us to see that Jonah would tell God no. And God asked him to do something that was above him, that was greater than him. And instead of being obedient, he decided to run the other way to Tarshish. And matter of fact, if you will read that passage again, it's mentioned quite a few times that he ran away from God. And Nineveh, if you were to have a map, you would see that where he was, Nineveh was only about 500 miles away, which wasn't too far for him. But Tarshish was actually 2,000 miles away. And he had to willingly get into a boat and say, no, I'm going to go 2,000 miles away so I could be disobedient to God. So I could willingly run away from God. And so my question to you this morning is, how many of us are running away from what God has asked us to do? We see this illustration in Genesis chapter 25, verse 32. It says it's about Esau, and Esau was the older brother of Jacob. He's entitled to his birthright, was set to inherit his father's wealth and become the leader of the family. He comes in one day and he's hungry, and he had just did a whole days of work, and so he's exhausted and he's tired. And how many of you have been there? And man, the food is just smelling amazing when you walk in through the door. And so Jacob, his brother, is just making this pot of stew, and it smells incredible. And so Jacob says this, Jacob gives him a deal. He says, I will give you a pot of stew if you give up your birthright and you hand everything over to me. And in his temporary need, Esau, he made a decision and he lost it all. See, it was a missed opportunity. And point number one is this: when we run away from God, when what he has asked us to do, what happens is that we actually miss opportunities. We miss opportunities. We miss opportunities for growth. We miss opportunities for guidance. We miss opportunities for our destiny. We miss opportunities for peace. And we see in verse 4, it says this, it says that the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose. All of a sudden in our lives, we are finding ourselves in the greatest battles, in the greatest storms, because we keep heading in the wrong direction. And God is trying to pull us back. He's trying to get our attention so that we could go his way. And Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says this, says, for I know the plans I have for you. Plans for you to prosper, plans for you to not be harmed, plans for you to have a hope and a future. And if we know that God's way is the right way, then why are we still trying to do things our way? You see, we miss opportunities when we don't obey. Point number two, we miss impacting others. We miss impacting others. And we see in verse 10, verse 8 to 10, that the other sailors started asking Jonah, who are you? Who are you? What do you do? Where do you come from? What have you done? See, they knew that he was running from the Lord. And verse 11 says that the sea started to get rougher and rougher. And when the storms in our life begin to get rougher and rougher, people begin to watch how we handle them. People know who you are. They know what you stand for. And if they're looking at us to see how we handle that particular situation, we have a responsibility. We have some work to do, right? They're looking to see how would Jesus handle this situation. And many of you probably have people in your life that are not walking close with the Lord, or are not where they are. I mean, my wife and I, we have people that are in our lives and family that are constantly asking us for things. It's interesting because they may not believe in our God, but they believe in the power of prayer. They know that there's something that shifts and changes when we begin to pray, when we begin to have unification. And I just want to have a real talk for a moment here. When the storms are coming into your life, what posture do you take? When you see that your spouse had a moral failure, had an affair, what stance do you take? That's difficult. When someone you trust takes your money, empties your bank account, a CPA, an attorney, somebody who you thought was supposed to be stewarding your finances well, decides to take his money, take your money, the little pennies you have, and empty your account. Or your best friend or your family member, someone you love the most, you hear them talking about you behind your back, gossiping about you, saying things and saying one thing in front of you, saying something behind your back. Or you go to Starbucks and you order something that's really, really fancy and they get it wrong. How do you respond to these little things or big things that happen in your life? How do you make it through? How do you get through it, right? Because the world would tell you, you need to retaliate. The world would say to you, you need to be able to have revenge. But Jesus is saying, would you come to me and would you find rest in me? Because I will supply all your needs. And the Bible says, it says, come to me all who are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest, meaning that the decision is not always yours to make. That when we put it in our Father's hands, He gets to make our decisions for us. Because of Jonah's stubbornness, he couldn't provide rest for himself or others. He actually created more problems for him and others. And I remember this growing up. I'd bring friends to church all the time. And they weren't believers, and I'd bring them in the room, and I'm like, you guys need to get saved, man. You guys need to turn and find Jesus, you know. And they're like, Jonathan, we love that you're saying that, but when you get saved, we'll get saved. Because you were just doing the same thing I was doing last night. So you're not actually showing me that there's an adjustment and change in your life if you're able to do all the things you're doing and you're good. And it's actually interesting because I never thought about that. Even with my own wife who came to Christ, when we were wanting to do all the things we wanted to do, she's like, well, why would I accept Jesus? We're good. And I had to intentionally decide to make a change and adjustment in my life because I knew that I had to lead and live by example. That it was going to be a model and a posture that I was going to have to walk through if I really, truly wanted to see people live this life of fullness and joy. And people are looking at us all the time to see how we're going to handle our situations, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers. They're walking through things and they're wondering, well, how is this person going to handle this? Just the other day, my wife was at work and she had to walk through. She deals with some folks that are walking through some really, really tough situations in their life at work. And when this one specific person was not doing well that day, and she pulled them aside, she said, can I pray for you this morning? Can I pray for you today? And surely the person said yes, and they prayed, and it was a moment of peace for her and a moment of peace for my wife. Like, God is calling us to show up and show out for Him. Do you believe that, church, this morning? Come on, don't get quiet on me. The same problem with Jonah is the same problem that many of us face. We face identity. We face things in our life that potentially causes us to lose hope and lose faith, but God's calling us to a higher power. He's calling us to a greater dimension. Lastly, we miss out on His blessings. We miss out on His blessings. You see, Jonah didn't care about Nineveh because the city had nothing to offer him. Nineveh was a place where wickedness and oppression lived. It was a place where people were lost. And Tarshish was a place of comfort and wealth. I mean, who doesn't want to hang out at a place where there's comfort and wealth? And the thing that God is asking us in this story, as we're looking at what he's trying to say to us in this whole passage, what he's saying is that our agenda needs to line up with his agenda. That just because we have certain things that are happening in our life doesn't mean that we miss the mark and miss the vision. That sometimes we have to keep the main thing the main thing. You see, God gave it to us, and God will take it away too. God delivered us, and so there's something that we have to live with, that we have to walk through, that it's not always going to be easy, that there are going to be days that we're not going to find joy, and maybe there's days that feel sorrowful, but we know that God is in control, that God's got the master plan. And see, Jonah, he faced a serious crisis in his life. And the crisis was that he began to think that he knew more than God did. See, Jonah he started coming into a room and forgetting that God is the owner of the room. That Jonah started picking up this posture of, here I am, I'm here, look at me, I'm gonna do all these things, and I'm gonna make sure that through me everything is gonna get accomplished. When truly what he should have been saying is, there you are, God. Thank you for showing up in my situation. Thank you for being my problem solver. Thank you for constantly giving me the miracles and blessings and healings in my life. See, no, you are the source of my strength. You are the source of my hope. There's nothing that can't happen without you, God. And I think that's why as a church, we're so fragile. Because we're so busy thinking about the things that we can do and not the things that God can do. This past week, I happened to watch some things that were unfolding through our nation, through the church, through social medias and articles and different things like that. And I just thought to myself, wow, how one little thing could divide us. How the enemy is trying to work, and he's trying to kill, and he's trying to destroy, and how easily we're letting him do it. That our opinions are more important than the mission of what God has for our life. And I was reminded of this passage as I was praying, and it's in 1 Chronicles 7:14. It says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. Church, this morning our God is in the business of healing. He's in the business of unity. He's in the business of peace. And when we find ourselves not having those things, we got to ask ourselves, are we far from God, or are we close to him? Are we heading to Nineveh? Are we heading to Tarshish? Where are we in life? And Tarshish may look really good. It may look like a great place to be. I was saying this to our team this morning, that my wife and I, we would watch this commercial that would come on all the time on TV. And it would say this, it was a hotel resort, and it would say, come to Jamaica and feel all right. And it would be like a waterfall and just like this oasis, and we'd be looking at each other like, oh, I want to feel all right. Like where I'm at right now, I ain't feeling good. Like I want to go to a place where I could feel all right, you know? And so we start saving up our pennies, putting it all together. We had this little package thing, and we paid, you know, for VIP, all this stuff, you know, to make it a great vacation. We land in the airport, and surely it was just a disaster. We get there, we have no idea where we are. The people that were supposed to meet us wasn't there. They're like, your names are not on the list, so you can't go on the bus. And we're like, we don't even know where we are. Like how is this? They're like, you need to get on this line that's 4 hours long and get through there, get through customs so they can. And we're like, no, we paid to be fast-tracked. You ever went through this where you need a document and you're trying to get it in your email and the email just won't work? I know many of you are like, you should have printed it out. You weren't ready, Jonathan. And so I'm looking for the email. I'm trying to find it. I'm showing them, hey, here it is. We finally get to the hotel. the thing we've been waiting for. You know, we've been counting down the days. Like, I mean, we had it all inclusive. It was incredible. We get there, we put our bags on, we're like, this is it? This is the place we've been waiting on? I mean, it looked a lot better on the commercial. Like, what happened to that place? And that's what happens to us. Tarshish was a place that was wealthy. It was a good place. It was a place that you should hang. And so there are moments in our life where we're heading in this destination and we're trying to go. And God's like, I didn't send you there to begin with. Where are you trying to go? I didn't tell you to go there. I told you to go to Nineveh. I told you needed to be in a place where you can cause the waves to finally have peace, where you could bring joy. See, he was on a mission. He was God's messenger. And in our life, we're all going to be God's messengers. Let's stand this morning. We're going to be God's messengers. And I think as time goes on in my own life, as many of you have had, you just have peaks and valleys and highs and lows. But in my own life, I would sometimes wonder, is this where I need to go? Is this where I need to, God, is this where you're sending me? And I remember there was this one time specifically, I was driving home from a wonderful date on the I-10, and things are going well, and God just began to speak to me. And he said, son, this is where I want you to build my church. And I'm like, no, God, I don't receive that. No, you're talking to the wrong one. Like, we just moved here, Lord. We just settled in. We're comfortable. God, don't do this. I'm good. Like, we got 1 million churches here. We don't need more. Like, this isn't the place. And I remember just wrestling with the Lord, and I'm having all this in my mind, in my conversations in my mind, and I was just being stubborn. I was being resistant to what God wanted in my life. And then one day he just pulled the rug from underneath me. All the things that I thought was comfortable and the things that I was embracing and the good life began to shift and change. And in this moment, I knew that it was God trying to get my attention, saying, hey, son, you've been trying to head to Tarshish. I'm trying to get you to Nineveh. And I'm going to have to do some things that are going to be tough for you, but I need to get your attention. Because if I don't get your attention, you're going to keep heading to Tarshish. And I think about that moment all the time, because then I accepted the moment. I said, but God, you got to give me $1 million. I'm going to need $1 million if I'm going to do this. He said, son, if I gave you $1 million, you would just mess it all up. See, because if I called you to it, I will get you through it. If I called you to it, I will get you through it. And this morning, it's important for you to understand that he will get us through it. See, I was so focused on what it should be that I forgot that it was a blessing from the Lord that he even called my name, that he even chose me. See, I didn't factor in the power of God through my situations. And I would have gone to Tarshish and I would have missed my opportunity to be part of something greater than myself. I would have missed impacting others through the mission of the gospel. And I would have missed out on the blessing of watching my son get baptized a couple weeks ago. My other son was leading worship today. My wife is serving others. She's smiling. Some of you, your kids got baptized here. Some of you, your kids got dedicated here. Some of you are part of youth. Today we saw a young man get baptized. I'm dedicated. Many of us can relate to a situation in our life. And what spiritual intimacy allows us to do is not miss the God factor in our life. So we're called this morning to have a personal relationship with him. This morning, you're going to get this wristband when you come out. You remember these wristbands, WWJD? It was a popular wristband back in the day, probably still is, but as I was preparing my message, the Lord convicted me in this moment. He said, I just want you in all of your ways to be an example of who I am. And so I ordered this bracelet for myself, and it stands for two things. The first thing I think about when I see this bracelet, I go, what would Jonah do? What would Jonah do in my situation? Okay, I'm gonna make sure I do the opposite of what Jonah did. And secondly, what would Jesus do in my situation? Because let's be clear and none of us get it right on the first time, right? Sometimes on the first pass, man, it wasn't what we thought it was gonna be. We learn all the time. I learn sometimes really the hard way. I see a lot of Jonah in myself. Stubbornness, disobedience, think I know everything. And God has to constantly remind me that you know nothing, that the best is still yet to come, that you just need to be obedient and follow my plan. And this morning, I want to give you a gift. I got these bracelets for you. They're in different colors, so you can choose one. But I'd love you to walk away with one. It'll be on the table or out there. Walk away with one, put one on, and just remind yourself constantly of how we should walk, of how we should behave, of how we should be as Christ followers. And maybe someone else, your kids, maybe somebody else needs to get it. Would you grab one when the time is right? But this morning we were singing a song called Good Plans. And I want to do something this morning. I know we're close to ending, but I want to do something this morning that we haven't done in a while. And I just feel like many of us are walking through things just like me. That the storms are coming in our life, that we feel like there's no hope. And somehow, some way, we're still being stubborn to the call. This morning, I'm just going to invite every single one of you to just fill this altar. I know some of you are like, I didn't come here for this, but maybe you did. Maybe this is what God wanted you to experience this morning. Maybe many of us are on our journey to Tarshish, to a place that doesn't exist. And God's trying to pull us back to Nineveh. And we're going to sing this song. I don't know if we can sing it from the beginning. Just play it from the beginning. But I'm going to invite you, would you step on out to the altar as a people of God, as people who worship this morning. I believe that this is our moment to really surrender to the Lord. And don't feel embarrassed, don't feel shy. Everyone's eyes are closed. Look, let me tell you something. This would be one of the best things that you do. Whether you come back or not, this is your moment to spend with your Father. If you came here to be with family, if you came here to do different things, I promise you that this is part of it. The covenant, the communication, the relationship, the spiritual intimacy that we need to build with the Lord comes with a surrender this morning. It comes with a surrender this morning.
Thank you for tuning into today's service. We pray that it's been life-changing and transformative. We pray that you've been equipped and you've encountered the presence of God. But maybe you watched today's sermon and you feel compelled to accept Jesus into your life. Can I just tell you, you have made the best decision ever. I just want you to pray this prayer with me real quick. I admit that I have sinned, that I've fallen short. But I believe that He is the way, the truth, and the life. And I will choose to follow Him for the rest of my days. If you've prayed that prayer today. We just want to say
Yay.
welcome home. Better yet, welcome to the tribe.
And there's ways for you to get connected via our website and social media. And we're excited to see you next Sunday.
Come on, we want to see you next Sunday.